What do you call me? Obi-Wan Kenobi?
The Obi-Wan Kenobi of financial planning.
Yeah. Welcome back to Behind the Wealth. I'm your host, Roger Abel. I'm here with Elias Randel, and we're going to talk today about the everyday money lessons that you can learn from billionaires. We thought this would be a really fun show. Look at the wealthiest people in America, take some tidbits from how they've created their success, how they hold on to their wealth. So let's go ahead and get into it, Elias.
Yeah. So you know what's fun for me to think about being a billionaire? It's fun but discouraging because less than 1% of the population is a billionaire. So it's kind of fun to think about, but the reality is I'm never going to be one.
But what do you do with $1 billion? I mean, if you think about it, what do you do with $1 billion other than, start something probably philanthropic? But yeah, you have the statistic here that 0.0002% of the population ever becomes a billionaire. So I think, it's fun to think about, but the likelihood's not likely.
Yeah, it's very unrealistic. But there's probably some practical wisdom in some of the things that they say, and we'll go through. We have several quotes from different billionaires from around the world. So I guess we'll get started with Warren Buffett, and the quote we found was, "Rule 1 is don't lose money, and Rule 2 is to refer to Rule 1." So what do you make of that?
Pretty simple. Well, let's just think about who Warren Buffett is for a minute. He's probably one of the most well-known investors of all time. He's a common name in probably every household in America. Whether or not you're an investor, if you say Warren Buffett, you know who he is probably. Yeah. Most people consume his products or products that his company owns, Dairy Queen, Coca-Cola, a lot of major companies. But I think when he says this, you have to think about it in a different light because it's obvious. Like, we wouldn't invest in something if we were going to lose money. But what he's really saying, in my opinion, is that invest in things we know, number one. But number two, if we give things time to work itself out, then arguably we're removing some of the risk of losing money from it. If you look over historical periods of time, the longer you let things work and invest, the likelihood goes up that you can have a positive return. And it's reflected, and we went back literally right before the show and said, what's the worst 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, and 20-year return for the S&P 500? Okay. And the worst 5-year return that I could find was minus 6.6% for 5 years. And that was ending in February of 2009. Now, full disclosure, I'm not sure that data is completely updated through COVID. If you looked at the end of March 2020, it could be different, but this is just for general, reasoning. We'll just use this data. The worst 10-year return was minus 3%, right? So it's getting better, minus 6, minus 3.
Right.
The worst 15-year return was a positive 3.7, and the worst 20-year was a positive 6.4. So what you start to think about is if people have a really good long-term vision and they keep their eye on the ball and they are investing for the long term and not speculating or gambling, the odds that they'll have a positive return goes up. And a lot of people will start to talk about, 20 years is a long time. Well, arguably, most people listening or watching this show have a 20-year time horizon. And I hear this a lot when people get ready to retire. They say, hey, well, I'm retiring next year, so I need to kind of get into this protectionism mode with their money. When arguably, they may spend as much time in retirement as they did working. They could have a 25 or a 30-year time horizon in retirement.
Yeah, they could. And, we just highlighted the worst performance in those time periods. And we didn't even talk about the best. And then the other thing to remind people, so I know there's a lot of clickbait, especially when it comes to Warren Buffett out there on the internet because he has been such a successful investor. But Warren Buffett is a value investor. I don't think he's a market timer. I mean, do you have any insight into that, or I guess the difference between value investing and trying to time the market, or at least his approach?
He has a very, very disciplined approach to how he decides when and what to buy, and he sticks to its approach. And it kind of came to light even in 2020 during COVID. A lot of people expected Warren Buffett to go make these massive purchases like he did in 2009, and that didn't happen. And I obviously don't know the rationale or what people are thinking behind the scenes, but my guess is it did not fit his strict investment criteria to be purchased or bought or sold or whatever the rationale may be.
Right. Right. So he probably is a great example of someone who doesn't make knee-jerk reactions. When he was younger in his investing career, he had a plan and he developed an investment philosophy that worked for him, and he's been very successful. And over the years, he's been very rigid about sticking to it.
Yeah, I think what it really goes down to is when you're buying or investing or doing anything with your money, that's has some risk of loss to it, right? Because there's investments that don't have risk of loss. CDs, bank accounts, some of those things don't have risk of loss. But if it does have risk of loss, if you're not comfortable owning it for 10 years, you probably should think twice about buying it. Because arguably at that point, it's becoming speculation for you versus part of a long-term investment process or goal.
Right. And there's a distinct difference between speculating and investing. To me, speculation is, well, I'm going to buy this at X price because I think it's going to appreciate to this price, and then I'm going to sell. Well, that to me, that's a speculative thing to do, where I think of investing as you're investing dollars probably on a systematic basis into a portfolio that is going to help you achieve success in the long term. But to circle back to his first rule, don't lose, and rule 2, refer to rule 1, don't lose money. So what does that actually mean? Because we know the stock market will have price fluctuation, and this year was a great example of that. Back in the spring, when COVID started, I think the market was down 35%, maybe a little bit more at one time, and really the only losers would have been people who sold while their investment accounts were down. And had you stuck it out, you were rewarded this year, because now the year's almost over and we're back to all-time highs. So relatively unscathed as in the big picture of things.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it goes back to the people that were able to execute that strategy that you just talked about and not make the knee-jerk reaction. Most of them had some kind of a goal, a financial plan. They weren't just randomly buying and selling because they thought today it was a good idea to buy something. They had a well thought out, well crafted plan to help them stay the course. Or they also just understood that markets ebb and flow, right?
Correct.
And I think the one takeaway from 2009 is there were a lot of investors who went to cash in 2009 and missed out on all of this. And I think that happened recently enough that people were able to say, hey, this is probably like 2009. We'll just wait for this to come back, because people have seen that happen. So maybe they still had a little bit of what we call recency bias and why they didn't make the knee-jerk reaction to go ahead and say, hey, let's pull out of this and sit this COVID thing out, because it was a pretty scary time and it was pretty unknown and we didn't really know what was going to happen. So the next person we're going to talk about, he is the second richest person in the world. He's worth $109.3 billion, the notorious Bill Gates. And we've actually heard a lot about Bill Gates this year because he does some stuff with infectious disease research. But his most famous quote is, you can achieve amazing progress if you set a clear goal and find a measure that will drive progress towards that goal. And when I read that, I thought about a lot of the things that we talk about with people on how to become financially successful, how to execute either a pre-retirement strategy or a post-retirement strategy. And really, if I sum that up in the financial world, it says establish a financial plan, that's the plan, and a personal fair rate of return or a personal benchmark. Because what it allows you to do is drown out all the noise associated with what's going on around you. I mean, whenever we deal with money, the most successful people have a clear goal in mind. So whether that's I'm saving for college, I'm saving for retirement, I'm saving for a new house, whatever it is, if we have a clear goal, we then can go match investments or investment strategies with some expected rate of return or a benchmark.
Right, right. And what I really enjoy about our process and the way we do things is client goals really dictate the financial plan. So our process isn't look at what we can do in the investment world, because I think, at least with our firm, investing is kind of the easy part of our job, but helping people come to realistic expectations and then also having goals for themselves, that's probably the harder part, and then managing those goals and expectations. What Bill Gates is talking about, that's exactly what we do through our process. Is we develop a financial plan that is focused on the goals, and then the plan helps us make the investment allocation, which really, once we've done all that other work, that part's kind of easy, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, and I think the cool thing about having a goal, if you don't have a goal, all that really matters then, and all anybody ever looks at are the returns. And the question then becomes, are those returns relevant to your goal or not, right? If we have a goal and we run a financial plan or put together a financial strategy for somebody and says, hey, we need to make on average 6.5% per year to be successful. Well, when the market does 12 and you make 8, are you going to be unhappy? Right? If your goal was 6, right?
You shouldn't be. You should be happy with that.
And it comes back to relative returns, right? The goal is not to massively outperform the market or massively underperform the market. It's to get a relative return to the market for the amount of risk that we're taking. So I think what's really cool about having a goal and kind of building that financial plan is that now we can say, hey, we need to make X amount per year to be successful. And if we do, then we can forget about all the other stuff.
Right. And also forget about, one thing people like to do is kind of track their progress compared to the S&P 500, which, it's just an index that measures the 500 largest companies in the country. But when you have goals and you're trying to reach relative returns, you can focus on, okay, I'm achieving my goals and achieving the lifestyle I want to have. And like you said, then you can drown out the noise of all these other things. And not to get too far in the weeds, but sometimes people are exposing themselves to too much risk, or maybe they don't have enough risk. But the important things is that all of those things are aligned, so then your financial plan is working for you.
Well, and you made a really good point, either too much or too little. And a lot of times I run into people that are actually very conservative. And once we do the financial plan, they're not as conservative as we thought. They just didn't know what they needed to do to be successful. So the default option was just to be ultra conservative, because that's not a scary world. So the education of having that plan put together and why we would own certain investments, really comes to light. The other thing it really does is helps quantify your decision-making process. We have a note here. It's really good. But, if you didn't have a plan and you had an opinion on the election and your opinion was, well, if Biden wins, the market's going to go down, you would have been exactly wrong. Right. And we have this conversation with people that, who the president is doesn't matter as much as fiscal policy. And all the people that were concerned about, and it's okay to be concerned, it's okay to be worried, but people that were worried about, Biden wins, the market's going down. Well, so far that hasn't happened. And if you went to cash, you missed out on some really nice gains since November the 4th. Having the plan really helps you stay away from, hey, should I make a change because of what's going on in my environment today?
Right. And with the election, during, I think it was the second debate, Donald Trump even said, if Joe Biden wins, markets will tank. I am certain of that. And that's just another example of someone being wrong. Now, he has a lot of supporters and a lot of followers, so there were probably a lot of people who took that as like objective market analysis. But we've talked about before, and we'll probably talk about moving forward, people's people's opinions, especially if they're looking at maybe a disappointing outcome, are really irrelevant to how the market will perform.
Yeah. And if everybody knew, they wouldn't need to tell us about it.
It'd be easy.
It'd be easy.
We'd probably just be investing our own money. We wouldn't be helping other people do it.
Exactly. So let's go on to the actual richest person in the world. When we created this, he was the richest person. I don't know if he still is because it fluctuates. But Jeff Bezos, worth a whopping $166.3 billion. I'm sure that's actually changed since we put this out. The quote that I like most from Jeff Bezos is, "I think you can foresee some things that will change in the next 10 years. The bigger question is what's not going to change in the next 10 years. And Jeff Bezos, going back and doing some research, and there's some really neat things I learned about Jeff Bezos, but he used that concept when developing his business plan. Well, if we take tidbits away from that, we should maybe be using that in our own financial plans. And it kind of causes me to think, hey, are there things we can add to make things better? But what we do have is we have historical data that we can lean on and say, hey, this has happened in the past. It may not happen in the future, but it makes it much more likely. What are your thoughts on, that kind of quote from Jeff Bezos?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of what he's getting at is control what you can control. So we can't control the future. We can't control short-term fluctuations in the market, but this isn't a prediction of performance, but I am certain over the next 10 years the market will be higher than it is today. Now, how we get there, there's going to be ebbs and flows. We might have huge run-ups on certain days, and we might have big negative days. But, for me, I think we can't control that, right, because we don't have a crystal ball. But what we can control is our behavior. So we can decide, well, we're not going to let these short-term fluctuations dictate our decisions, and we can control staying focused on what is important.
That's good takeaway, Elias. The one thing that nobody knows is actually what the market's going to do. And we ran into this a lot the last probably 10 months, I would say. People, is now a good time to buy? Is now a good time to sell? And trying to go through that rat race just historically long-term doesn't work. People can't time the market. In fact, I got a very kind of rewarding phone call not too long ago, and he called me, and what did he call me? Obi-Wan Kenobi?
The Obi-Wan Kenobi of financial planning.
Yeah, and it was kind of, that's a compliment if you're a Star Wars, which I'm not a Star Wars guy, but Elias is like, that's the greatest compliment of all time.
That's a very high compliment from a Star Wars follower.
When I first met this individual, we had the discussion. He had interviewed with a couple of very large investment companies that are nationally known. And they told him how they would get him out of the market and they would get him back in the market. And I looked at him right in the eye and said, I can't do that. I'm not good enough to time the market. I said, and neither are they, because here's the question. And this is what I asked. If you get out of the market, which is the easiest thing to do, hitting the sell button's easy. I said, when will you get back in? When it goes down 10%? Probably not, because you probably think it's going to go down further. Well, what happens if it goes up 15%? Are you going to get back in? Probably not, because you're going to feel the recency of losing out on the 15%. Well, back to the story, he had a friend of his who got out when the Dow was 26,000. And he was having dinner with this individual, and his friend said, man, I just don't know when I'm going to get back in. And he started chuckling. And the friend goes, well, what are you chuckling about? He goes, we had this exact conversation with my financial advisor. And he said, my financial advisor told me we won't know when to get back in. And it was the same thing he was struggling with, because he got out when the market was at 26. When my client had called me and shared this with me, the market was at about 28,000. Right. My guess is he's still not back in the market. And now, are you going to get back in the market when it's at 29,000 in the Dow?
Yeah, it's like the trader's dilemma or the timer's dilemma is, when is enough? And then, oh, I missed out, so now it's not a good time. And people are probably going to get tired of hearing us say this, but time in the market is a much greater indicator of success than timing the market.
Absolutely.
And someone the other day on financial news I was watching, he said, well, the best time to invest was yesterday, so your second best opportunity is today. And I thought, that's another good, simple, straight to the point piece of advice that people should be listening to.
Well, and you know what? If you say, hey, I've got 10, 15, 20 years to invest this money, the price today doesn't matter.
Right.
Most of the time. Right. That's not a guarantee most of the time. So
right, because that's probably something that's not going to change, as markets will continue to go up in the long term.
So I've had my greatest compliment of the year, the Obi-Wan Kenobi financial advisor.
That's probably the best compliment for the last few years, I would imagine.
It still doesn't get you to $1 billion though.
No, you're not. No.
The next billionaire we're going to talk about is Jim Simmons. He's worth $21.6 billion. He's actually a mathematician by trade. And he founded Renaissance Technologies, which is a large investment company / hedge fund. And he actually has a great story to go with why he has this quote. But his quote is, "It is important to understand what you are invested in, and if you don't, get out." And the backdrop to this story is when Jim talked about this, he had actually invested money in Bernie Madoff's fund. And over time, he started to question, how is he able to do this? And because he's a mathematician, he started to put the math behind it. And what he found is that 80% of the returns couldn't be accounted for. So he exited the fund because he didn't know how it could happen. And it goes back to the old story. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And for most people, you don't have to understand the trading strategies, but I listen to Dave Ramsey sometimes, and he talks about spouses and wives in general. And if they have a gut feeling about something, you kind of follow that. Well, if you have a gut feeling about something that it's just not right, it might not be right, and it's okay to cut bait. So we just thought this was a really good goal, because people sometimes buy things or get invested into things or even have a financial plan that they don't understand. And inherently, I believe that the majority of financial advisors or wealth consultants or investment advisors out there are really out there to help and educate people. The days of 20 years ago where, hey, give me your hottest stock pick. My cousin used to host here locally a show with a local stock advisor, and they would actually be talking about stock picks over the radio. This is 1999, 2000, when the tech bubble was happening. The days of picking the hot individual stock for somebody's over, and we're here to educate. So if you're working with somebody or you have a financial plan that you're not sure about, the easiest thing to do is go have it redone, get a second opinion. But if you don't understand what you're invested in, it's okay to get out.
Yeah, it is. And investing can be as simple as just understanding your time horizon, understanding your risk tolerance, and also just understanding that you don't need to beat the market. And for any do-it-yourselfer investors listening to the show, you don't need to understand derivative trading strategies or the most complicated ways to make money.
If you're sub 35, you're in the accumulation stage. You don't need to overcomplicate this. No. Right? Pick out funds that have good track histories, whether that's an index or an actively managed fund. Check out the expenses and some of the other stuff, or call a financial advisor and just get an opinion. That's what we're here for. We're here to help people. If you're looking for help with some of this stuff, if you don't have a financial plan or you just need a little help, you can get us at btwealthshow.com. That's the website. We're always more than happy to help anybody who wants to be helped.
Yeah, and I'll add another thing, because there are, out there with, financial news or investing news, sometimes there's an opinion that working with an advisor is too costly. Now, we don't do this work for free, but I would challenge anyone, show me someone who started working with an advisor when they're in their 20s, and when they were in their 60s, they were unsuccessful towards their financial goals.
That's actually a really good point, because if you get to your financial goals and you accomplish what you do, how much is that actually worth? Could you quantify that in dollars? That would actually be very hard to say, well, you took me at 25 years old, and at 55, my goal is to retire, and I did that with 100% or 99% certainty. How much would somebody actually be willing to pay over their lifetime to get to that point?
I would be willing to bet the fees that we make over their lifetime working with us is not as high as what they would value that. Like if they were just to look at it and say, here's a fair value for that,
yeah,
we're probably cheaper than that.
I mean, it's actually unquantifiable. It's like Visa, right?
Right.
What's the Visa commercial?
I don't know which one.
It's priceless. I mean, if you think about it, like, think about the Visa commercials they used to run, like, a $12 hot dog at the game, a $42 catcher's mitt, and, a weekend with your kids, priceless. Well, I'd argue that if you start working with an advisor at 25 or 30 and got yourself to 60 and did it with dignity and how you wanted to, it's probably priceless.
Yeah, probably.
I just came up with that out of the blue. I thought that was pretty good.
That was good.
All right. Well, let's move on to the next one. And honestly, he's probably maybe even more well-known than Warren Buffett, just because he's constantly in the news. He's a master innovator, probably one of the most innovative people we've seen in a very long time, but Elon Musk.
Yeah. And his net worth we have here, $46.2 billion. That was July 2020. He might be richer than that right now with the way the Tesla stock price has been tracking.
I saw yesterday is when they actually put Tesla into the S&P 500, and his net worth went up $15 billion in a day. So I'm guessing it is higher than that.
That'd be a fun day.
It would be a terrific day. But, he has a great quote too. And his is more kind of inspiring, but there have to be reasons that you get up in the morning and want to live. Why do you want to live? What's the point? What inspires you? And what do you love about your future?
Yeah. And I guess for me, the simple answer when I think about those things is in regards to my financial plan, for me, it's lifestyle. Because that's kind of how I've defined all my financial planning goals is there's a certain lifestyle I want to maintain. And I don't see that ever changing. So that excites me, at least as far as my financial planning's concerned. But, there's other things people could be excited about. Maybe something that excites you is paying for a child of yours to go to college. Or maybe something could excite you that when I retire, I want to celebrate by taking a big vacation. Or maybe you're in the accumulation phase right now and you're doing a good job with your saving and you're on track and you want to splurge and spend a bunch of money to go on a vacation. All those type of things excite people. And those are all things that we can help with through a financial plan. We can help determine how to achieve those goals.
Yeah, and we coined this phrase probably a couple of years ago, and after a meeting with a client, this came to me. But it's not always just a financial plan; it's really more of a financial decision tree, right? If you want to buy a vacation house, how does that affect your long-term financial future? If you want to, quantify any financial decision, it can be done through a financial plan that uses goals-based decision planning. But when I think of this quote, it takes me back to the show we did with Jonas not too long ago and about his book, A No Budget Lifestyle. And so many people spend so much time. My cable bill's $36 and my cell phone's $81. And they're spending all of this time doing that how is that anyway inspiring? Where if they went out and said, hey, I want to take a trip to Florida with my kids, how do I figure out how to make that happen? That's inspiring. It wants to make you get up. But when all you do is spend all your time budgeting, scrimping, saving as much as possible, well, that doesn't inspire people. It's time to take a different approach. And that was the whole emphasis of Jonas's book. It wasn't that to just go waste money. It was to design your spending habits around what your goals are and what makes you excited to get up each and every single day.
Yeah, and for the people listening to the show, just one kind of simple idea. If you can just have a paradigm shift from like having a negative connotation towards your money where maybe you're trying to budget but you feel like it's never working out, or you actually I had a conversation with a young guy a while back where he's told me, he goes, if I just quit, and he's I think 24, 25 years old, and he goes, if I could just quit going out on the weekends, I could stick to my budget. And I said, well, what about this? what if you put your lifestyle in your budget and then you quit feeling bad about going out on the weekends? And I asked him, I go, how realistic is it that you're going to stop going to happy hour on Friday and you're going to stop going out on Saturday nights? You're 25 and you're single. It's not going to happen.
No, that's a super good point, because what he's not doing is he's not building a no budget lifestyle. He's saying, well, I could get rid of this. Well, maybe if he listed in priority what was important to him, that probably is at the top of the list, right next to like food and shelter. That's probably high on the list. So why not put that in there and then figure out the other places to save? Maybe he could say, well, because I like to go out, maybe I don't need 372 cable TV channels, or maybe I don't need the NFL ticket, or those other things he could cut out of his kind of spending habit, because he's building his budget around his lifestyle. It's like I read all the time, well, the latte's the reason you won't retire. You know, you buy a latte every day, you won't be able. That's not the reason. The reason most people can't retire is because they don't put a strategy together and they don't pay themselves first and start saving money. So that's a really good takeaway from Elon Musk. When I first read it, I'm like, what does this have to do anything with money? Like, it doesn't seem like it has anything to do with money. But you shouldn't be inspired every day to work with your money, not drugged down. So, all right, let's move on to the next one. He is very famous. I would say almost every single person, not every single person, but a vast majority of the people use his technology every single day. He's worth $85.4 billion. Mark Zuckerberg, and he's famously known for wearing the hoodie.
Yep. And now he's getting more famous for spying on everyone on Facebook, which I get a kick out of, because I don't really feel like it's spying if you're just offering the information.
I actually think he knows more about me than I know about myself.
He probably does.
Which is a little scary. So if anybody's actually watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix right now, it will spook you out a little bit as to how much they know about you. I mean, I watched them, like, I looked at my phone, how much screen time am I spending every day? I'm like, that's maybe too much. Like, you'll just feel differently for a couple of weeks and then you're going to go back to your old habits. But, you know, his famous quote is, the biggest risk is not taking any risk. And this actually is very, very, very relevant to your money. And I'm not talking about, hey, I bought the S&P 500, but I need to go buy this, really high risk stock. That's not what I'm talking about. But too many people that we run into run inflationary risk. And what I mean by that is they have investments that aren't even keeping up with inflation, i.e. bank accounts, certificates of deposits, some bonds that are out there. And that is actually more of a risk to some portfolios, for some people, than anything else out there. And I think specifically with people that are reliant typically upon two income streams. So, if you think about retirement assets people have, they have Social Security, 401k, and then there's a percentage of the population that has a pension. And the biggest issue with a pension is that most don't have a cost of living adjustment. Right? Mm-hmm. And Social Security, it has a cost of living adjustment, but it's typically just enough to offset the cost in the Medicare premium that they get. So then you look at their investments, you're like, man, we have to be so safe with this money. And for people that have a Social Security check and a pension check, their investments really become their long-term hedge against inflation, right? Because if they retire today with $6,000 a month of income and they live 20 years, arguably that $6,000 of income is probably worth about $4,000 in the future, 20 years from today. So their spending power is being eroded. So when I think of that, the first thing that comes to mind is the biggest risk is inflation, not keeping up with it, being too conservative. And really the way that we conquer that and kill it and help people get by that is by establishing this financial plan that gives them the optimal asset allocation and gives them a goal, like we've talked about through this whole show. What's the goal that you need to earn to be successful long term?
Yeah, and you're never going to eliminate risk totally. Because even if your money's in cash, you're facing, like we just talked about, inflationary risk. So I think the more important thing and the thing to kind of be cognizant of is how are you managing that risk?
Yeah, it goes back to it. People's default option is always conservative because they don't know or aren't educated. And the longer I do this, I'm going on 18 years doing this, that education is the most important thing we do for people. Educate them on why they own things, how they should be invested, how this all works. I think the biggest takeaway in kind of closing this out for me and what we learned from these 6 billionaires and how we can apply it to everyday investors is, if we set some clear goals, have a plan, and execute it, we may not make $1 billion or be worth $1 billion, but we're all going to get closer to the goals that we've set forth. Because really, without setting a goal, how do you accomplish anything? We have to have some benchmark and parameters to start to work with people so they have goals for this money so they can make really well educated, informed decisions.
Yeah, I agree. And just to kind of conclude, like you just said, having a plan, executing the plan, that's going to determine your success far more than any sort of like complicated trading strategy or any hot stock tip. So I guess I just tell listeners, keep it simple, stay focused on the plan.
Yeah, and you know what? If somebody out there wants a plan, they can go to the website btwellshow.com. There's a request information. There's the ability to just start doing your financial plan right there. Once again, btwellshow.com. We're more than happy to help you. Till next time, this is Roger, Abel, and Elias. Thanks for listening.